welcome to my best books of 2021. 2021, bit of a changeable year on the personal and global front, but when it comes to my reading, it's been a really, really great year, and I wanted to take this episode of my No More Misery Must to celebrate that. So I've picked 10 books out of the 100, swing, that I've read. I know, I have no life, to talk to you about today. It is currently, what day is it? At the time of recording, it is Tuesday the 14th of December. So arguably I do have another 2 weeks of the year, but I wanted to chat to you about books that I've read this year, just because it feels like a nice cozy thing to end the year on, and also because I'm really genuinely going to take the pressure off myself for the next 2 weeks. If I don't want to read, I'm not going to frickin' read. I probably will read. But the point is, like, I might not finish another book this year. And if I do, that's great. I can update you about it in my winter wrap-up that will be coming in January. So if there is anything I read between now and then that I think would have made my top 10, you will be notified. But at the moment, the books that I have been loving, it's going to be very hard to top them, if I'm honest. On the other hand, I have hit my reading goal of 100 books, but my reading pages goal on Storygraph was 30,000, and I'm 1,961 pages short. So if I do feel like reading, at least I might be able to hit that goal. But to be honest, I think that goal was ambitious, if not a little bit foolish. Let's get into the books. So I do only have 3 of them physically, I realised, to show you, because so many of them I've either listened to them in audiobook, or I've read the ebook, or I've put them back in storage. But there are 3 here today to talk to you about, and I'm going to talk to you about these ones first, and the rest I will show on screen. If I've covered these books in other videos, I'll leave the links in the description, which goes for our first one, First Comes Love, by Tom Rasmussen. Tom is a working class non-binary author who's written this great non-fiction kind of discussion, walk around the idea of marriage and what it means for loads of different kinds of people. I inserted some of my learnings from this book in my video, Lies You're Told About Marriage in Your 20s, that I'll leave a link to below. But it's a look at how inclusive marriage is, why some people might want to get married, why some people might not want to, and some of the stats around it as well. It was a really interesting kind of journalistic look at the idea of marriage, and I think it's really unusual. It's not something I've read before, and I think it was really well executed, and it gave me a lot to chew on, which is why it deserves its spot in the top 10 this year. The next one is The Murderer's Ape. If I could sell this to you in a sentence, I'd be like, the book that will recapture the magic of what it was like to read as a child. I never thought I'd feel the way that I felt when I read the first Harry Potter book for the first time when I was 7 years old, but I felt that way when I started this book. This is a Swedish translation. It is a middle grade book, but to be honest, the level of the writing puts a lot of adult books to shame. Like, I was kind of reading this book and realised how many of the books, probably why this list for 2021 is so short, because reading books like this made me realise like how high the bar is for writing, and how many like mediocre books that I write, mediocre books that I write, tick, correct, mediocre books that I read when it comes to using language, like the actual art of forming a sentence and forming a good paragraph. It's all in here. This is your textbook, take it home please. Authors, study. This is just such a meticulously written book, and obviously also probably down to the translator as well as the writer, but I couldn't be more impressed with the artistic execution of this book, even though it's a middle grade book, which is a genre that I don't always read, but probably should. But this is a book that like first swept up Craig, and then I was so jealous of the like magic and happiness he was feeling that I like grabbed it after he was finished. And I also read the sequel, The False Rose, this year as well, which was really good as well. But essentially it's about a intelligent ape. She can't speak, but she is friends with this sailor who is her best friend in the world, and they have this understanding that, you know, they're equals. They both run the ship together. She's great at being a mechanic. She can also write, and he gets accused of murder and is put in prison. And it's about her quest to prove that he is innocent, and also just to get on without him in a world where she is treated like a second-class citizen and like an animal, which is the theme of all of the like the vegan video I made, and this theme of being like, why do we say, like, when we say somebody's treated badly, we say we treat them like an animal. It is Sally's interaction with the world and her exploration of the world as somebody who often is treated badly because of the fact that she's an ape and not a human. And she travels to loads of different parts of the world, she interacts with loads of different kinds of communities, and she's just the most complex and lovable character you'll ever read. And I know it's a book about an ape, but you just need to trust me on this, okay? Speaking of middle grade, the other middle grade book that has made my top 10 this year is the series of unfortunate events, The End, the 13th one. I kind of picked this partly symbolically because I loved discovering the series of unfortunate events in 2020 and I finished the series in 2021. I think putting other things in the top 10 above this just feels like factually wrong. And also just because I just had the best time reading these, and I will probably reread them next year. I don't have any nostalgia attached to these books. I didn't really enjoy the film. I kind of enjoyed some of the TV series, but frankly gave up halfway through. These books aren't good or hyped because of the nostalgia factor, because a lot of people read them when they were little. I picked them up during the pandemic and I think they genuinely deserve a place in the classics, in the canon. I can't believe how good these books are and how talented Lemony Snicket or Daniel Handler is. I just think, again, I think they put a lot of books to shame. It makes me think that maybe we as a literary community don't spend enough time formulating books, because look what happens when you really put your mind to it. Jesus Christ, please read. If you're really bored of reading or you're not really into reading at the moment, this will get you out of a reading slump. Like that. Okay, next. The next book that simply has to make the top 10 is Black and British. I think this is probably one of the best books I've ever read, maybe. And I've dipped into it several times before. I actually owned the book for about 3 or 4 years before this year sitting down and be like, right, this year I'm going to read the whole thing from start to finish. It is a long book. The audiobook is 24 hours long, and it is a sweeping history of the history of Black people in Britain. But when you think about how long it is, and you think about maybe your favourite podcast and how long you spend listening to that, or how long over your lifetime you've spent learning about the history of your country that inarguably has been whitewashed, I think I can probably spare 24 hours to correct and flesh out the very pathetic skeleton of British history that I was spoon-fed at school. So I think 24 hours time investment is the bare minimum, and because I read it over the course of a year, I was able to kind of listen to a few hours a month, take loads of notes. I've made a million different bookmarks in the audiobook and try to really let it settle, let myself learn slowly and correct a lot of that history in my head. What's great about it is it starts kind of pre-BC, and it really fills out so much stuff. So even when we do talk about Black history in Britain, we often talk about World War II, we often talk about Windrush, which are incredible things to talk about, and I've talked about books about Windrush on this channel before, but it's actually only, I think, the last 3 hours that we hit World War I, World War II, and Windrush and stuff, and it's the last 3 hours that covers that century, when actually the rest of the book is about all the other history, and there is so much. It's so interesting. It obviously also talks about the history of American racism, because they are so intertwined, and also the history of various different parts of Africa, Nigeria, Barbados, and it just really gives you this incredible overview of the world and how Britain has interacted with that in sometimes good but mainly shitty ways. But also there's so many intricacies, and what's amazing about David's writing is that he is just this incredible historian that has an incredible talent for writing and has this amazing vocabulary that keeps you hooked, but is also remains kind of neutral. He lets the facts speak for himself. He doesn't bring modern day politics into it. Not that that's a bad thing, but I just think he really writes it as a straight history that's so inarguable and so watertight that there's no way you can be actually I think this. It is also just so well paced. At no point was I bored during this book, which is incredible considering how long it is and how bad I am about reading straight history books. He writes it really episodically, so everything feels like a small drama. There were parts of the book that maybe lasted about 10 or 15 minutes, but after I'd listened to it, I was like, well, that could be a whole film in itself. That's a TV drama series. And because so many parts of the history are just so engaging on so many levels. Suffice to say, it's incredibly complicated, and also it aligns with a lot of the history you already know. So you'll be able to insert the correct history, the missing history, into the history you already know, and it aligns stuff with like Darwinism, Churchill, like all of these, like Dickens, all of these characters you have in your brain, they appear in a new way in this book. I can't recommend it enough, basically. That's some of my blabbering. I'm sure that I'll formulate more thoughts on it, and I've got no doubt that I'll read it again. Another thing about these kind of long history books to note is that, like, obviously I'm not going to remember everything in it. That would be humanly impossible. Otherwise I would be Dr. David himself. However, what I think is great about as many people reading this kind of thing as possible is that it prevents you from being lied to. Like, I know I couldn't regurgitate every fact that I read in this book to you right now, but if you told me a contradictory fact, then I'd be able to sense that you were lying to me. I'd be like, that doesn't sound quite right, because I definitely read something in this book that contradicts that. So I think that's what's important about history. Not that you know it all off the top of your head, but at least you have borne witness to it, so that when people try and lie to you about it, you have like at least a framework for being able to plug that in and test if it's true. Next book. Please read that one though. The next book is Trick Mirror, Reflections on Self-Delusion. This is an incredible essay collection that just roasts everything about what I know about life. Gia, the author, was on a reality show before the internet, which again is an incredible essay to hear about. She also talks about this idea of AI and robots and the threat of the robot and why we're scared of outsourced autonomy, and there's so much stuff around hot take culture and this idea of like wanting to talk about morality all the time but not actually create an environment in where you can execute morality. It's just such a, like, there's so many essay collections I read this year that had some amazing essays in them, but this is one of the only ones that I think really hit the bat, like hit every base. Like there isn't a weak essay in this collection, and so many of them hit so true for me. I ended up, after listening to the audiobook, buying the ebook and then screenshotting all my favorite paragraphs and making it into a Google Doc for myself so I can go back to them. Like that's how good it was. I can't believe it. This had a bit of hype when it first came out, and I was a bit like, oh, another essay collection about the internet. I'm okay, thank you. But this one's different. It's not like other girls. It's just, it does genuinely add to the conversation rather than just being like, isn't it interesting how kids are always on their phones nowadays? An essay collection. Like, it's not that. It's genuinely amazing. Please read it. I could have like a 5-hour wine-fueled conversation about each essay, and I plan to in 2022. Transcendent Kingdom by Yargazi. I'm not going to talk too much about this because I already reviewed it in my Women's Prize video, but I like to sell this one to people as a will they, won't they romance between a woman and her religion. But it's also kind of about a black woman who's working in STEM, whose family are from Ghana, and it's negotiating her relationship with her mother because this is not really a spoiler, this happens in the first few pages and I think is on the back of the book. Her brother dies of an overdose because of his addiction. And it's about her using rats in an experiment to learn about the idea of addiction and kind of playing God, and how that interacts with her beliefs as a Christian, and how like she's deciding whether to move away from that or not, and her relationship with her mother, who is in such kind of dire straits about the death of her brother that she's not really functioning properly. And it's all about like how we understand addiction, how much can we play with the future of others, should we apply meaning to a tragic situation, or is it just a tragic situation? And it's just so well written, and so God, that book. Next, I'm getting upset. Jeez, quite a lot of them are depressing this year, aren't they? Although at the time I wasn't depressed. You know, sometimes you read a book and it's like it's sad, but it's cathartic, and because a lot of art is, but then also it just makes you happy because somebody out there is that talented. Like, when you just witness somebody absolutely smashing it at something they're already incredibly good at, that just makes me happy, even if the book is sad. Anyway, Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. The paperback just came out and it looks amazing. So I'm going to show you the paperback cover here. But it's about two people who are essentially experiencing poverty, who are in their 50s, who live with their elderly mother who dies. And it's about them trying to survive outside of this system of registry and cards and money in a rural place in England, in the countryside, which is like, I don't know if you don't know, but in the UK, there are lots of parts of the UK where people are experiencing a huge amount of poverty in the country, and it's something that's not that visible, but it's like really hard to navigate for those people, and Claire Follow's incredible at representing that and showing it in a really empathetic way. And it's about these kind of two twins who are in their 50s and haven't really, in society's eyes, started their life, but also like to operate outside the system, like to just kind of grow some of their own plants and just live day to day rather than trying to plug themselves in. And also it represents a lot of stuff around illiteracy in the UK as well, because there's lots of that. So one of the twins can't read or write, and it's about her like trying to navigate the world without that. And it's so beautiful. It's really about grief and longing and how cruel the world can be, but also like how on a very basic level beautiful it is. And I was just bowled over by that book, as you can tell. Another sad book that I read is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I've already reviewed it in my women's fiction video, but it's a really modern experimental book. If you like Sheila Heti or like this, look at the internet and how we interact on it. But it's a book of two halves, as a lot of people describe it, whereas the first half is all about a woman who is completely submerged in the internet and the poetics and the, I don't know, emotional poverty of that. And then the second half of the book, something very real and very analogue happens in her life. And the book keeps the same style, but completely switches focus. And the contrast just like hits you in the gut. It's really clever. You should read it. As you should all of these, but you should read it. Another book I read that was really sad was Piranesi by Suzanne Clarke, which won the Women's Prize. So good. It was so lovely to see that because it's such an experimental, unusual, short book, and Suzanne Clarke is just like, what the fuck? Like she basically wrote this book that was a massive bestseller when I was a bookseller like 10, 15 years ago. That was just so strange, but somehow made it to the top bestsellers list despite it not ticking any of the commercial boxes that books usually do. Then she disappeared for a very, very long time, which we now discover from Piranesi is because she was struggling with an incredibly hard long-term illness that kept her housebound. So this book is a fantasy book that's very short and about a man who is trapped in an endless hall of statues, and he only meets one other person and very occasionally, and she didn't write it about the pandemic because it was written before the pandemic, but it's about isolation and being unmoored and not really knowing who you are. And it's basically his diary as he explores these halls and what the statues might mean and what they're saying. And from that premise, it sounds like a book where not a lot happens, but it is completely action-packed and loads of stuff happens and there's a huge mystery. But obviously I wouldn't tell you that because I want you to read the book. I'm just astonished by that book. I can't believe that a human can do that, but... Next, let's talk about a vaguely happy book. Sarah Winman, you might know her from When God Was a Rabbit and stuff like that. She's just come out with a new book. It's called Still Life, and I read it because I had to interview her for this event, and the cover looks not how I pictured the book. Just saying. No offense to the cover designer. Even though I like Sarah Winman's writing, I might not have picked this one up. So if you're looking at this cover and you're like, I don't know, Lena, like, please just ignore the cover. This is a sweeping epic friendship love story, I guess, about two characters, although mainly I'd say there's more emphasis on Ulysses. You meet during World War II. Some of it's set in Florence and some of it is set in the East End of London. And it's about this older woman who is an art historian who is part of the effort to hide a lot of the beautiful art in Florence from Nazi occupation and from Nazi attack. So they're trying to preserve the art. Ulysses is a soldier who's just lost somebody in his life who was fighting with him, and they meet on this night and they have this incredible like friendship connection and this like really deep kind of talk. And she tells him like, one day you should go to Florence. Like you have to go to Florence. Something will happen to you there. You should go. And he goes. This isn't too much of a spoiler, but I really want you to read the book, and it's one of those like small spoilers that I really hope will hook you in. He goes and there's a man who's about to jump off a roof in Florence, and he talks the man down. The man invites him in for a meal, and they share this meal together, and then he returns to the East End of London where he has this crony of amazing like East End found family in this small dingy pub, and they have loads of drama that happens there, and you get to know all these amazing like intricate characters in the East End. At a critical point in a lot of the characters' lives, he gets word that the man that he talked off the roof has died, and he left the flat in Florence that he saved him in to Ulysses. So Ulysses makes this decision that he's like, I think I'm just gonna go and live in that flat in Florence. And he takes the broken people around him that don't have a home and don't know what they're doing next with him, and they go and live in this flat in Florence. and they kind of find their feet again, and they become locals, and they make friends with them, and they talk about the war. And meanwhile, you also get like some of the story of the older woman. She is a lesbian at a time where it was not always okay to be that. So it's about her like aging through that process. It's a perfect book beside your bed book. Like, keep this one, because it's so, whatever's happened in your day, you won't be able to think about anything else when you're reading this. It's beautifully, like, it really sucks you in and makes you feel like you're there. There's so many characters, but it's not hard to follow because they're all so different and memorable that's fine. And just please read it. It happens over like loads and loads of years. So if you're a slow reader, it's a really nice book to read slowly and keep dipping into, because like you could almost like kind of experience it in real time. Like, it happens so beautifully, and I can't actually believe that this book isn't real. Like, I kind of believe Ulysses and his friends exist. Just me. Haven't been to Florence, haven't checked, but yeah. And also, if you're just missing travelling, like, it's cool to just like imagine that you're in Florence. Why not? And then lastly, I wanted to talk to you about this book that wasn't what I expected at all, called Why We Eat Too Much, which isn't what he wanted to call the book. And he says that in the book. He's like, my publisher wanted me to call it this, and I know that it will make people read the book. It's not really what I wanted to call it. My title would be much more nuanced. But anyway, it's one incredibly considerate and one of us, kind of like body neutral, completely non-judgmental, expert doctors rant about all of the misunderstandings and the history of those misunderstandings about obesity and overeating. And it's a really sweeping, kind of almost history book about the history of appetite, why we've got weight management so wrong, and why it's so much more complicated than we realise. It's an incredibly comforting, and it was almost like breathing out when I read this book, because it made so much more sense to me than a lot of the science that we're fed at school about weight. I've gone on a rant about this before, but like, GPs in the UK don't really study nutrition, it seems. Which is part of this book as well. Like, why? So a lot of the stuff that they might tell us in appointments is sometimes hearsay, completely made up. Like, the BMI scale in general is just like a wild essentialization of what is a really complicated thing to assess. I made loads and loads of notes on this book, so I can't tell you them all in this very short space of time, but just looking at some of the notes that I've taken, there's a whole section about how fat is an organ. It's one of your vital organs. It's a life-preserving part of our bodies. So when we talk about like losing fat, we have to be really careful about that, and how fat is actually kind of our energy regulation. How much fat we have and how we store it is our way of our bodies regulating. And what can also change during our lifetime and varies from person to person is our weight set point, which is different for everybody and can change depending on your socio-political situation, and also how much you have done restrictive dieting. Restrictive dieting can actually higher your weight set point, so the weight that your body automatically returns to will be higher if you have a history of bad dieting, basically, which is, again, just so wild to me. There was loads of stuff about epigenetics, so the different genetic makeup of people, say in the Pacific Islands, is different for a big historical reason. Slavery actually did have an impact on our weight set points for different kinds of people from specific parts of the world. Mind blown again. The Dutch famine was like another big historical point in the history of nutrition and weight. The mass processing of food and processed food being circulated in the population is something that can be genetically passed down, and is something that is actually changing the way humans are evolving. What? He also talks about this concept of assortative breeding, wherein because of the shame and like the really wrong way we treat people who are overweight, means that society makes it so overweight people are more likely to marry and procreate with each other, and the implications of that as well, and how that's something that we as a society have generated. That's not a natural process. It's because of those kind of stigmas that you know, slim people tend to procreate with slim people. And wow, so much I hadn't thought about, and it was really, really interesting. If you're interested in just dipping into this topic a bit, I would recommend some podcast episodes that I'll link below, but I would also just really recommend this book. I can't believe when I talk about it more, I can't believe I didn't know so much of it. It also touches on PCOS. God, look how long these notes are. I really should read over these. Early farming. And then it also does have a section at the end that I kind of just want to like read again and check before I like recommend, because I don't really understand it all. But a thing at the end that's like, look, if you do want to change your wet set point, your weight set point, here are some pointers on how to do it, but it's something that may not result in weight loss and should take years. He basically discounts this idea of weight loss as a practice being something that should take weeks or months. Like, he's literally like, that's not a thing. If you're going to like make a plan to long-term lose some weight, you should probably like make a 5-year plan. So anyway, I think it sounded like a really balanced argument at the end, and obviously I'm not an expert, so I don't know everything about it, but just generally this book as a whole was a really valuable insight into the more questions I can ask about the history of nutrition and weight when it comes to like humans, because just looking at the last 50 years obviously isn't enough. Like, we've been growing these weird flesh puppets for hundreds of thousands of years, so looking back hundreds of thousands of years is probably the only sensible way to go. I have been talking for way too long because while I was in a kind of bad mood before I started filming this video, talking about all my favourite books for 2021 has really cheered me up and reminded me that it's been a great reading year and I've learnt loads. Thank you so much for watching. Could you tell me your favourite books of 2021? Because it will cheer me up knowing that other humans have enjoyed things this year, and also so that I can copy them and maybe read some of them in 2022. I don't know. Thank you so much for watching this video. We're almost at the end, but not yet. We've still got some to go of the No More Miserymas series. If you want to watch it all, it is here. If you want to say thanks, you can either join the Gumption Club, who consistently make these videos possible, or you can hit the super thanks there, just for a quick little like, oh Lena, have a cup of cake. Cup of cake? Cup of coffee. Slice of cake. So if you just want to make a one-off like, cheers Lena, like you loads, then that button, the super thanks button, is there. You can also just tell a friend if you have some and they like reading, because I want more people to read these bloody books. And if you have read any of these books, let me know what you thought. Okay, shut up, Lena. Go back to your laptop and do your spreadsheets, because tax is due in January. Okay, bye. Frog snog out.